Chapter 12 of Darnley by G.P.R. James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 12. Today is ours. Why do we fear? Today is ours. We have it here. Let's banish business, banish sorrow. To the gods belong tomorrow. Cowley. I have dreamed of bloody turbulence. Shakespeare. In profound silence will we pass over Sir Osborne's farther entertainment at the Abbey, as well as how Longpole contrived to make himself merry, even in the heart of a monastery, together with sundry other circumstances which might be highly interesting to that class of painstaking readers who love everything that is particular and orderly, and would fain make a historian not only tell the truth, but the whole truth, even to the colour of his heroine's garters. For such curious points, however, we refer them to the scrupulously exact Vonderbrugius, who expends the greater part of the next chapter upon the description of a flea hunt, which Longpole got up in his truckle-bed in the monastery, and who describes the various hops of the minute vampire, together with all that Longpole said on the occasion, as well as the running down, the taking, and the manner of the death, with laudable industry and perseverance. But, for the sake of that foolish multitude who interest themselves in the fate and adventures of the hero rather than in the minor details, we will pass over the whole of the next night much in the same manner as Sir Osborne, who, sound asleep, let it fleet by in silence undisturbed. His horses, however, were scarcely saddled, and his 4 attendants prepared the next morning, than he was informed that the Lady Katrine Bulmer was ready to depart, and proceeding on foot to the great gates of the Abbey, which fronted the high road on the other side from that on which he had entered, he found her already mounted on a beautiful Spanish jennet, with her 2 women and a man, also on horseback. By her side stood the abbot, with whom she had now made her peace, and who, kindly welcoming Sir Osborne, led him to the young lady. "Sir Knight," said he, "I give you a precious charge in this my dead sister's child, and I give her wholly to your charge, with the most perfect confidence, sure that you will guide her kindly and safely to her journey's end. And now, God bless you and speed you, my child," he continued, turning to the young lady. "And believe me, Kate, there is no one in the wide world more anxious for your happiness than your poor uncle." I know it, dear uncle," answered the lady; "and though I be whimsical and capricious, do not think your Katrine does not love you too." A bright drop rose in her eye, and crying, "Farewell, farewell," she made her jennet dart forward, to conceal the emotion she could not repress. The knight sprang on his horse, bade farewell to the abbot, and galloped after Lady Katrine, who drew in her rein for no one, but rode on as fast as her steed would go. However, notwithstanding her jennet's speed, Sir Osborne was soon by her side; but seeing a tear upon her cheek, he made no remark, and turning round, held up his hand for the rest to come up, and busied himself in giving orders for the arrangement of their march, directing the 2 women, with Lady Katrine's man, and Longpole, to keep immediately behind, while the 3 attendants given him by the duke concluded the array. The young lady's tears were soon dispersed, and she turned laughing to her women, who came up out of breath with the rapidity of their course. "Well, Geraldine," she cried, "shall I go on as quick? Should I not make an excellent knight at a just, Sir Osborne? Oh, I could furnish my course with the best of you. I mind me to try the very next justs that are given." "Where would you find the man," said Sir Osborne, "to point a lance at so fair a breast, and let it be Cupid's shaft?" "Ah, Sir Osborne Maurice," answered the lady, "you men jest when you say such things, but you know not sometimes what women feel. But trust me, that same Cupid's shaft that you scoff at, because it never wounds you deeply, sometimes lodges in a woman's breast, and rankling there will pale her cheek, and drain her heart of every better hope." The lady spoke so earnestly that Sir Osborne was surprised, and perhaps looked it, for instantly catching the expression of his eye, Lady Katrine coloured, and then breaking out into one of her own gay laughs, she answered his glance as if it had been expressed in speech. "You are mistaken, quite mistaken," said she. "I never thought of myself. Nay, my knight, do not look incredulous. My heart is too light a one to be so touched. It skims like a swallow o'er the surface of all it sees, and the boy archer spends his shafts in vain. Its swift flight mocks his slow aim. But to convince you, when I spoke," she proceeded in a lower voice, "I alluded to that poor girl, Geraldine, who rides behind. Her lover was a soldier, who, when Tournay was delivered to the French, was left without employment, and after having won the simple wench's heart, and promised her a world of fine things, he went as an adventurer to Flanders, vowing that he would get some scribe to write to her of his welfare, and that as soon as he had made sufficient, what with pay and booty, they would be married. But 18 months have gone, and never a word." "What was his name?" asked the knight. "I would wish much to hear." "Hal Williamson, I think she calls him," said the lady; "but it matters little. The poor girl has nigh broke her heart for the unfaithful traitor." "You do him wrong," said the knight. "Indeed, lady, you do him wrong. The poor fellow you speak of joined himself to my company at Lille, and died in the very last skirmish before the death of the late emperor. With some money and arms, that I expect transmitted by the first Flemish ship, there is also a packet, I fancy, for your maid, for I forget the address. From it she will learn that he was not faithless to her, together with the worst news of his death." "Better, 1,000 times better!" cried Lady Katrine energetically. "If I had a lover, I would 1,000 times rather know that he was dead than that he was unfaithful. For the first I could weep all my life, and mourn him with the mourning of the heart; but for the last there would be still bitterer drops in the cup of my sorrow. I would mourn him as dead to me, I would mourn him as dead to honour, and I should reproach myself for having believed a traitor almost as much as for being one." "So," said the knight, with a smile, "this is the heart that defies Cupid's shaft, that is too light and volatile to be hit by his purblind aim." "Now you are stupid," she said pettishly. "Now you are just what I always fancied a man in armour. Why, I should have thought that while your custrel carries your steel cap, you might have comprehended better, and seen that the very reason why my heart is so giddy and so light is because it is resolved not to be so wounded by the shaft it fears." "Then it does fear," said Sir Osborne. "Pshaw!" cried Lady Katrine. "Geraldine, come up and deliver me from him. He is worse than the Rochester rioters." In such light talk passed they their journey, Sir Osborne Maurice sometimes pleased, sometimes vexed with his gay companion, but upon the whole amused, and in some degree dazzled. For her part, whatever might be her more serious feelings, the lady found the knight quite handsome and agreeable enough to be worthy a little coquetry. Perhaps it might be nothing but those little flirting airs by which many a fair lady thinks herself fully justified in exciting attention, with that sort of thirst for admiration which is not content unless it be continually fresh and active. Now, with her glove drawn off her fair graceful hand, she would push back the thick curls from her face, now adjust the long folds of her riding dress, now pat the glossy neck of her pampered jennet, which, bending down its head and shaking the bit, would seem proud of her caresses; and then she would smile, and ask Sir Osborne if he did not think a horse the most beautiful creature in nature. At length they approached the little town of Sittenbourne, famous even then for a good inn, where, had the party not been plagued with that unromantic thing called hunger, they must have stopped to refresh their horses, amongst which the one that carried the baggage for Lady Katrine, being heavily laden, required at least 2 hours' repose. The inn was built by the side of the road, though sunk 2 or 3 feet below it, with a row of 8 old elms shadowing its respectable looking front, which, with its small windows and red brick complexion, resembled a good deal the face of a well-doing citizen, with his minute dark eyes half swallowed up by his rosy cheeks. From its position, the steps by which entrance was obtained, so far from ascending, according to modern usage, descended into a little passage, from which a door swinging by means of a pulley, a string, and a large stone, conducted into the inn parlour. Here, when Lady Katrine had entered, while the knight gave orders for preparing a noon meal in some degree suitable to the lady's rank. She amused herself in examining all the quaint carving of the old oak panelling, and having studied every rose in the borders, and every head upon the corbels, she dropped into a chair, crying out, "Oh dear, what shall I do in the meanwhile? Bridget, girl, bring me my broidery out of the horse basket. I feel industrious, but make haste, for fear the fit should leave me." "Bless your ladyship," replied the servant, "the broidery is at the bottom of all the things in the panier. It will take an hour or more to get at it, that it will." "Then give me what is at the top, whatever it is," said the lady. "Quick, quick, quick, or I shall be asleep." Bridget ran out according to her lady's command, and returned in a moment with a cithern or mandolin, which was a favourite instrument among the ladies of the day, and placing it in Lady Katrine's hand, she cried, "Oh, dear lady, do sing that song about the knight and the damsel." "No, I won't," answered her mistress. "It will make the man in armour yawn. Sir Knight," she continued, holding up the instrument, "do you know what this is?" "It seems to me no very great problem," replied Sir Osborne, turning from some orders he was giving to Longpole. "It is a cithern, is it not?" "He would fain have said, a thing that some fools play upon, and other fools listen to," cried Lady Katrine. "Make no excuse, Sir Osborne. I saw it in your face. I'm sure you meant it." "Nay, indeed, fair lady," replied the knight. "It is an instrument much used at the court of Burgundy, where my days have lately been spent. We were wont to hold it as a shame not to play on some instrument, and I know not a sweeter aid to the voice than the cithern." "Oh, then you play and sing? I am sure you do," cried the giddy girl. "Sir Osborne Maurice, good knight and true, come into court, pull off your gauntlets, and sing me a song." "I will truly," answered the knight, "after I have heard your ladyship, though I am but a poor singer." "Well, well," cried Lady Katrine, "I'll lead the way, and if you are a true knight, you will follow." So saying, she ran her fingers lightly over the strings and sang: "Quick, quick, ye lazy hours, plume your laggard wings. Sure the path is strewed with flowers that love to true love brings. From morning bright to fading light, speed, oh speed your drowsy flight. If Venus's courier be a dove, as ancient poet sings, oh, why not give to absent love at least the swallow's wings, to speed his way the livelong day, till meeting all his pain repay?" Thus sang Lady Katrine, and it may well be supposed that the music, the words, and the execution all met with their full share of praise, although Bridget declared that she liked better the song about the knight and the damsel. "Now, your promise, Sir Knight," cried the lady, putting the instrument in Sir Osborne's hands. "Keep your promise as a true and loyal knight." "That I will do, to my best power," said Sir Osborne, "though my voice will be but rough after the sweet sounds we have just heard. However, to please Mistress Bridget here, my song shall be of a knight and a damsel, though it be somewhat a long one. The night was dark, and the way was lone, but a knight was riding there, and on his breast the red cross shone, though his helmet's haughty crest upon was a lock of a lady's hair. His beaver was up, and his cheek was pale, his beard was of auburn brown, and as night was his suit of darksome mail, and his eye was as keen as the wintry gale, and as cold was his wintry's frown. Oh, sad were the tidings thy brow to share, sad to hear and sad to tell, that thy love was false to the vows she had made, that her truth was gone, and thy trust betrayed, by her thou lovest so well. Now fast, good knight, on thy coal-black steed, that knows his lord's command, for the hour is coming with fearful speed, when her soul the lady shall stain with the deed, and give to another her hand. In the chapel of yon proud towers 'tis bright at the altar there, for around in the blaze of the tapers' light stand many a glittering courtly knight, and many a lady fair. But why are there tears in the bride's bright eyes, and why does the bridegroom frown, and why to the priest are there no replies, for the bitter drops and the struggling sighs the lady's voice have drowned? That clang of an armed heel, and what stately form is here! His warlike limbs are clothed in steel, and back the carpet heroes reel, and the ladies shrink for fear. And he caught the bride in his mailed arms, and he raised his beaver high. Oh, thy tears, dear girl, are full of charms, but hush thy bosom's vain alarms, for thy own true knight is nigh. And he pulled the gauntlet from his hand, while he frowned on the crowd around, and he cast it down, and drew his brand. Now any who dare my right withstand, let him raise it from the ground. But the knight drew back in fear and dread, and the bride clung to his side. And her father, lowly bending, said, in the Holy Land they had deemed him dead, but by none was his right denied. Then now read on, sir priest, he cried, for this is my wedding day. Here stands my train on either side, and here is a willing and lovely bride, and none shall say me nay. For I'll make her the lady of goodly lands, and of many a princely tower, and of dames a train, and of squires a band, shall wait at their lady's high command, in the night of de Morton's bower. Alack, alack! cried Lady Katrine, as Sir Osborne concluded. You are not a knight, but a nightingale. Well, never did I hear a man in armour chirrup so before. Nay, what a court must be that court of Burgundy! Why, an aviary would be nothing to it. But if the master sings so well, she continued, as Longpole entered, bearing in Sir Osborne's casque and shield, the man must sing too. Bid him sing, fair knight, bid him sing. He will not refuse to pleasure a lady. Oh, no, I am always ready to pleasure a lady, answered Longpole, who, as he went along, though he had found it impossible to help making a little love to Mistress Geraldine, had, notwithstanding, noted with all his own shrewd wit the little coquettish ways of her mistress. But give me no instrument, my lady, but my own whistle, for mine must not be prick song, but plain song. Young Harry went out to look for a wife. Hey, Harry Dally! He said he would have her in virtue's rife, as soft as a pillow, yet keen as a knife, with a hey, ho, Harry. The first that he met with was quiet and glum, hey, Harry Dally! But she'd got a bad trick of sucking her thumb, and when he cried Mary, the never would come, with a hey, ho, Harry. The next that he came to was flighty and gay, hey, Harry Dally! But she would not be played with, although she would play, and good humour was lost if she'd not her own way, with a hey, ho, Harry. The next that he tried then was gentle and sweet, hey, Harry Dally! But he found that all people alike she would treat, and loved him as well as the next she should meet, with a hey, ho, Harry. The next that he thought of was saucy and bold, hey, Harry Dally! But he found that he had not the patience sevenfold that could bear in one person a jade and a scold, with a hey, ho, Harry. So weary with searching for wedlock enow, hey, Harry Dally! He thanked his good stars he had made no rash vow, and like the old woman went kissing his cow, with a hey, ho, Harry. The saucy knave! cried Lady Katrine, laughing. Out upon him! Bridget, Geraldine, if ye have the spirit of women, I am sure you will not exchange a word with the fellow the rest of the journey. What! Could he not make his hero find one perfect woman? But here comes our host with dinner, for which I thank heaven, for had it been later, my indignation would have cost me my appetite. As soon as the horses were refreshed, Sir Osborne, with his fair charge, once more set out on the longer stage, which he proposed to take ere they paused for the night. The news which he had received at Sittingbourne, leading him to imagine that the tumults at Rochester having been suffered, by some inexplicable negligence, to remain unrepressed, had become much more serious than he at first supposed, he determined to take a byway, and avoiding the town, pass the river by a ferry, which Longpole assured him he would find higher up; but still this was longer, and would make them later on the road, for which reason he hurried their pace as much as possible, till they arrived at the spot where the smaller road turned off, at about 2 miles' distance from Rochester. It was a shady lane, with on one side high banks and hedges, wherein the tender hand of April was beginning to bring forth the young green shrubs and flowers; and as the knight and lady went along, nature offered them 1,000 objects of descant which they did not fail to use. Their conversation, however, was interrupted after a while by the noise of a distant drum, and a variety of shouts and halloos came floating upon the gale, like the breakings forth of an excited multitude. As they advanced, the sounds seemed also to approach. "My casque and lance," said Sir Osborne, turning to Longpole. "Lady, you had perhaps better let your jennet drop back to line with your women." "Nay, I will dare the front," said Lady Katrine. "A woman's presence will often tame a crowd." "You are with a band of soldiers," said Sir Osborne, hearing the clamour approaching, "and must obey command. What! Horse! Back! Back!" And laying his hand on the lady's bridle, he reined it back to a line with her women. "Longpole, advance!" cried the knight. "Left hand spear of the third line to the front. Archers behind, keep a wary eye on the banks. Shoot not, but bend your bows. I trust there is no danger, lady, but 'tis well to be prepared. Now, on slowly." And thus opposing what defence they could between Lady Katrine and the multitude, whose cries they now heard coming nearer and nearer, Sir Osborne and the two horsemen he had called to his side, moved forward, keeping a wary eye on the turnings of the road, and the high banks by which it was overhung. They had not proceeded far, however, before they descried the termination of the lane, opening out upon what appeared to be a village green beyond, the farther side of which was occupied by a motley multitude, whose form and demeanour they had now full opportunity to observe. In front of all, the host was a sort of extempore drummer, who, with a bunch of cock's feathers in his cap, and a broad buff belt supporting his instrument of discord, seemed infinitely proud of his occupation, and kept beating with unceasing assiduity, but with as little regard to time on his part as his instrument had to tune. Behind him, mounted on a horse of inconceivable ruggedness, appeared the general, with a vast cutlass in his hand, which he swayed backwards and forwards in menacing attitudes, while, unheedful of the drum, he bawled forth to his followers many a pious exhortation to persevere in rebellion. On the left of this doughty hero was borne a flag of blue silk, bearing, inscribed in golden letters, "The United Shipwrights," and on his right was seen a red banner, on which might be read the various demands of the unsatisfied crowd, such as cheap bread, high wages, no taxation, etc. The multitude itself did indeed offer a formidable appearance, the greater part of the men who composed it being armed with bills and axes, some also having possessed themselves of halberts, and even some of hackbutts and handguns. Every here and there appeared an iron jack, and many a prentice boy filled up the crevices with his bended bow, while half a score of loud-mouthed women screamed in the different quarters of the crowd, and with the shrill trumpet of a scolding tongue, urged on the lords of creation to deeds of wrath and folly. The multitude might consist of about 5,000 men, and as they marched along, a bustle and appearance of crowding round one particular spot in their line led the knight to imagine that they were conducting some prisoner to Rochester, in which direction they seemed to be going, traversing the green at nearly a right angle with the line in which he was himself proceeding. "Hold!" said Sir Osborne, reining in his horse. "Let them pass by. We are not enough to deal with such numbers as there are there. Keep under the bank. We must not risk the lady's safety by showing ourselves. Ah, but what should that movement mean? They have seen us, by heaven! Ride on, then. We must not seem to shun them. See, they wheel. On, on! Quick! Gain the mouth of the lane." Thus saying, Sir Osborne laid his lance in the rest, and spurred on to the spot where the road opened upon the green, followed by Lady Katrine and her women, not a little terrified by the roaring of the multitude, who, having now made a retrograde motion on their former position, occupied the same ground that they had done at first, and regarded intently the motions of Sir Osborne's party, not knowing what force might be behind. As soon as the knight had reached the mouth of the road, he halted, and seeing that the high bank ran along the side of the green guarding his flank, he still contrived to conceal the smallness of his numbers by occupying the space of the road. He paused a moment to watch the movements of the crowd, and determine its intentions. Now, being quite near enough to hear great part of an oration which the general whom we have described was bestowing on his forces, Sir Osborne strained his ear to gather his designs, and soon found that his party was mistaken for that of Lord Thomas Howard, who had been sent to quell the mutiny of the Rochester shipwrights. "First," said the ringleader, "hang up the priest upon that tree. Then let him preach to us about submission if he will. And he shall be hanged, too, in his lord's sight, for saying that he, with his hundreds, would beat us with our thousands, and let his lord deliver him if he can. Then some of the men with bills and axes get up on the top of the bank. Who says it is not Lord Thomas? I say it is Lord Thomas. I know him by his bright armour." "And I say you lie, Timothy Bradford," cried Longpole, at the very pitch of his voice, much to the wonder and astonishment of Sir Osborne and his party. "Please your worship," he continued, lowering his tone, "I know that fellow. He served with me at Tournay, and was afterwards a sailor. He's a mad rogue, but as good a heart as ever lived." "Oh, then, for God's sake, speak to him," cried Lady Katrine from behind, "and make him let us pass; for surely, sir knight, you are not mad enough, with only 6 men, to think of encountering 6,000. "Not I, in truth, fair lady," answered the knight. "If they will not molest us, I shall not meddle with them." "Shall I on, then, and speak with them?" cried Longpole. "See, he heard me give him the lie, and he's coming out towards us. He'd do the same if we were 1,000. Meet him, then," said the knight. "Tell him all we wish is to pass peaceably. The right-hand man advance from the rear and fill up," he continued, as Longpole rode on, taking care to maintain a good face to the enemy, more especially as their generalissimo had now come within half a bowshot of where they stood. As the yeoman now rode forward, the ringleader of the rioters did not at all recognise his old companion in his custrel's armour, and began to brandish his weapon most fiercely; but in a moment afterwards, to the astonishment of the multitude, he was seen to let the point of his sword drop, and seizing his antagonist's hand, shake it with every demonstration of surprise and friendship. Their conversation was quick and energetic, and a moment after Longpole rode back to Sir Osborne, while the ringleader raised his hand to his people, exclaiming, "Keep your ranks! Friends! These are friends!" "Our passage is safe," said Longpole, riding back; "but he would fain speak with you, your worship. They have taken a priest, it seems, and are going to hang him for preaching submission to them. So I told him if they did, they would be hanged themselves; but he would not listen to me, saying he would talk to you about it." "Fill up my place," said the knight. "I will go and see what can be done. We must not let them injure the good man." So saying, he raised his lance, and rode forward to the spot where the ringleader waited him, plainly discerning, as he approached nearer to the body of the rioters, the poor priest, with a rope round his neck, holding forth his hands towards him, as if praying for assistance. "My shield bearer," said he, "tells me that we are going to pass each other without enmity; for though we are well prepared to resist attack, we have no commission to meddle with you or yours. Nevertheless, as I understand that ye have a priest in your hands, towards whom ye meditate some harm, let me warn you of the consequences of injuring an old man who cannot have injured you." "But he has done worse than injured me, sir knight," said the ringleader. "He has preached against our cause, and against redressing our grievances." "Most probably not against redressing your grievances," said Sir Osborne, "but against the method ye took to redress them yourselves. But listen to me. It is probable that the king hearing of your wants and wishes, he being known both for just and merciful, may grant you such a relief as only a king can grant. But if ye go to strain yourselves with the blood of this priest, which were cowardly, as he is an old man, which were base, as he were a prisoner, and which were sacrilegious, as he is a man of God, ye cut yourselves off from mercy for ever, and range all good men amongst your enemies. Think well of this." "By the nose of the tinker of Ashford," said the man, "your worship is right; but how the devil to get him out of their hands? That's the job. However, I'll make 'em oration. But what I was wanting to ask your worship is, do you know his grace the king?" "Not in the least," was the laconic reply of the knight. "Then it won't do," said the man. "Only, as merry Dick Heartley said you were thick with the good Duke of Buckingham, I thought you might know the king too, and would give him our petition and remonstrance. However, I'll go and make them fellows oration. They're wonderful soon led by oration." And turning his horse, he rode up to the front of the body of rioters, and made them a speech, wherein nonsense and sense, bombast and vulgarity, were all most intimately mingled. Sir Osborne did not catch the whole, but the sounds which reached his ears were somewhat to the following effect: "Most noble shipwrights and devout cannon-founders, joined together in the great cause of crying down taxation and raising your wages. To you I speak, as well as to the tinkers, tailors, and prentices who have united themselves to you. The noble knight that you see standing there, or rather riding, because he is on horseback, he in the glittering armour, with the long spear in his hand, is the dearly beloved friend of the great and good Duke of Buckingham, who is the friend of the commons and an enemy to taxation." Here loud cries of "Long live the Duke of Buckingham!" "God bless the Duke!" interrupted the speaker, but after a moment he proceeded. "He, the noble knight, is not Lord Thomas Howard, and so far from wishing to attack you, he would wish to do you good. Therefore he setteth forth and showeth, praise be to God for all things, especially that we did not hang the priest, that if we were to hang the priest, it would be blasphemous, because he is an old man, and rascally, because he is a man of God. And moreover, and whereas, if we do not our petition, he will infallibly come down, if we do, with an army of 50,000 men, and hang us all with his own hands, and the Duke of Buckingham will be against us. Now understand, I am not speaking for myself, for I know well enough that, having been elected your captain, and ridden on horseback while ye marched on foot, I am sure to be hanged anyhow. But that is no reason why ye should all be hanged too, and therefore I give my vote that Simon the cannon-founder, Tom the shipwright, and long-chinned Billy the tinker, do take the priest by the rope that is round his neck, and deliver him into the hands of the knight and his men, to do with as they shall think fit, and that after this glorious achievement we march straightway back to Rochester. Do you all agree?" Loud shouts proclaimed the assent of the multitude, and with various formalities the three deputies led forth the unhappy priest, more dead than alive, and delivered him into the hands of Longpole, after which the generalissimo of the rioters drew up his men with some military skill upon the right of the green, leaving the road free to Sir Osborne. The knight then marshalled his little party as best he might, to guard against any sudden change in the minds of the fickle multitude; and having mounted the poor exhausted priest behind one of the horsemen, he drew out from the lane, and passed unmolested across the green into the opposite road, returning nothing but silence to the cheers with which the rioters thought fit to honour them. Their farther journey to Gravesend passed without any interruption, and indeed without any occurrence worthy of notice. Lady Katrine and Sir Osborne, Geraldine and Longpole, mutually congratulated each other on the favourable termination of an adventure which had commenced under such threatening auspices, and every one of the party poured forth upon his neighbour the usual quantity of wonder and amazement which always follows any event of the kind. The poor priest, who had so nearly fallen a victim to the excited passions of the crowd, was the last that sufficiently recovered from the strong impressions of the moment to babble thereupon. When, however, his loquacious faculties were once brought into play, he contrived to compensate for his temporary taciturnity, shouting forth his thanks to Sir Osborne Maurice from the rear to the front, declaring that the preservation of his life was entirely owing to his valour and conduct, that it was wonderful the influence which his sole word possessed with the multitude, and that he should never cease to be grateful till the end of his worldly existence. Sir Osborne assured him that he was very welcome, and remarked with a smile to Lady Katrine, who was laughing at the priest's superfluity of gratitude, that in all probability it was this sort of exuberance of zeal that had brought him into the perilous circumstances in which they had at first found him. "But can zeal ever be exuberant?" demanded Lady Katrine, suddenly changing her tone, and then fixing the full light of her beautiful dark eyes upon the knight, she added, "I mean in a friend." "It can," said Sir Osborne, "when not guided by prudence; but I do not think a fool can be a friend." "Come, sir knight, come," said the lady, "let us hear your idea of a friend." "A friend," replied the knight, smiling at her earnestness, "must be both a wise man and a good man. He must love his friend with sufficient zeal to see his faults and endeavour to counteract them, and with sufficient prudence to perceive his true interests and to strive for them. But he must put aside vanity, for there is many a man who pretends a great friendship for another merely for the vain purpose of advising and guiding him, when in truth he is not capable of advising and guiding himself. The man who aspires to such a name must be to his friend what every man would be to himself, if he could see his own faults undazzled by self-love, and his own interests unblinded by passion. He must be zealous and kind, steady and persevering, without being curious or interfering, troublesome or obstinate. "Would I had such a friend!" said Lady Katrine with a sigh, and for the rest of the way she was grave and pensive. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of Darnley by G.P.R. James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 13. Let us act freely, carelessly, and capriciously, as if our veins ran with quicksilver. Ben Jonson. Renowned metropolis, with glistening spires and pinnacles adorned. Milton. It is strange, in the life of man, always fluctuating as he is between hope and fear, gratification and disappointment, with nothing fixed in his state of existence, and uncertainty surrounding him on every side, that suspense should be to him the most painful of all situations. One would suppose that habit would have rendered it easy for him to bear, and yet, beyond all questions, every condition of doubt, from uncertainty respecting our fate to mere indecision of judgment, are all, more or less, painful in their degree. Who is it that has not often felt irritated, vexed, and unhappy, when hesitating between two different courses of action, even when the subject of deliberation involved but a trifle? Lady Katrine Bulmer, as has already been said, was grave and pensive when she reached Gravesend, and then, without honouring the knight with her company even for a few minutes, as he deemed that in simple courtesy she might have done, she retired to her chamber, and shutting herself up with her two women, the only communication which took place between her and Sir Osborne was respecting the hour of their departure the next morning. The knight felt hurt and vexed, for though he needed no ghost to tell him that the lovely girl he was conducting to the court was as capricious as she was beautiful, yet her gay whims and graceful little coquetry had both served to pique and amuse him, and he could almost have been angry at this new caprice, which deprived him of her society for the evening. The next morning, however, the wind of Lady Katrine's humour seemed again to have changed, and at the hour appointed for her departure she tripped down to her horse all liveliness and gaiety. Sir Osborne proffered to assist her in mounting, but in a moment she sprang into the saddle without aid, and turned round, laughing, to see the slow and difficult manoeuvres by which her women were fixed in their seats. The whole preparations, however, being completed, the cavalcade set out in the same order in which it had departed from the abbey the day before, and with the same number of persons. The poor priest whom they had delivered from the hands of the rioters being left behind, too ill to proceed with them to London. "Well, sir knight," said the gay girl as they rode forward, "I must really think of some guerdon to reward all your daring on my behalf. I hope you watched through the livelong night, armed at all points, lest some enemy should attack our castle." "Faith, not I," answered Sir Osborne. "You seemed so perfectly satisfied with the security of our lodging, lady, that I e'en followed your good example and went to bed." "Now he's affronted," cried Lady Katrine. "Was there ever such a creature? But tell me, man in armour, was it fitting for me to come and sit with you and your horsemen in the tap-room of an inn, eating, drinking, and singing like a beggar or a ballad singer?" The knight bit his lip, and made no reply. "Why don't you answer, Sir Osborne?" continued the lady, laughing. "Merely because I have nothing to say," replied the knight gravely, "except that in Sittingbourne, where you did me the honour of eating with me, though not with my horsemen, I did not perceive that Lady Katrine Bulmer was, in any respect, either like a beggar or a ballad singer." "Oh, very well, sir knight, very well," she said. "If you choose to be offended, I cannot help it." "You mistake me, lady," said Sir Osborne. "I am not offended." "Well then, sir, I am," replied Lady Katrine, making him a cold, stiff inclination of the head. "We had better say no more upon the subject." At this moment Longpole, who with the rest of the attendants followed at about 50 paces behind, rode forward, and put a small folded paper into Sir Osborne's hand. "A letter, sir, which you dropped," he said aloud. "I picked it up this moment." The knight looked at the address, and the small silken braid which united the two seals, and finding that it was directed to Lord Darby at York House, Westminster, was about to return it to Longpole, saying it was none of his, when his eye fell upon Lady Katrine, whose head, indeed, was turned away, but whose neck and ear were burning with so deep a red that Sir Osborne doubted not she had some deep and blushing interest in the paper he held in his hand. "Thank you, Longpole, thank you," he said. "I would not have lost it for 100 marks." And he fastened it securely in the foldings of his scarf. Though he could willingly have punished his fair companion for her little capricious petulance, the knight could not bear to keep her in the state of agitation under which, by the painful redness of her cheek and the quivering of her hand on the bridle, he very evidently saw she was suffering. "I think your ladyship was remarking," said he, calmly, "that it was the height of dishonour and baseness to take advantage of anything that happens to fall in our power, or any secret with which we become acquainted accidentally. I not only agree with you so far, but I think even that a jest upon such a subject is hardly honourable. We should strive, if possible, to be as if we did not know it." Lady Katrine turned her full sunny face towards him, glowing like a fair evening cloud when the last rays of daylight rest upon it. "You are a good, an excellent creature," she said, "and worthy to be a knight. Sir Osborne Maurice," she continued, after a moment's pause, "your good opinion is too estimable to be lightly lost, and to preserve it I must speak to you in a manner that women dare seldom speak. And yet, though on my word, I would trust you as I would a brother, I know not how. I cannot, indeed I cannot. And yet I must, and will, for fear of misconstruction. You saw that letter. You can guess that he to whom it is addressed is not indifferent to the writer. They are affianced to each other by all vows, but those vows are secret ones, for the all-powerful Wolsey will not have it so, and we must needs seem, at least, to obey. Darby has been some time absent from the court, and I was sent to the abbey. What would you have more? I promised to give an instant information of my return, and last night I spent in writing that letter, though now I know not in truth how to send it, for my groom is but a pensioned spy upon me." "Will you trust it to me?" said the knight. The lady paused. "Do you doubt me?" he asked. "Not in the least," she said, "not in the least. My only doubt is whether I shall send it at all." "Is there a hesitation?" demanded the knight in some surprise. "Alas, there is," answered she. "You must know all. I see it. Since I have been at the abbey, they have tried to persuade me that Darby yields himself to the wishes of the cardinal, and is about to wed another. I believe it false. I am sure it is false. And yet, and she burst into tears. "Oh, Sir Osborne," she continued, drying her eyes, "I much need such a friend as you described yesterday." "Let me be that friend, then, so far as I may be," said Sir Osborne. "Allow me to carry the letter to London, whither I go after I have left you at the court at Greenwich. I will ascertain how Lord Darby is situated. If I find him faithful, which doubt not that he is, till you hear more, I will give him the letter. Otherwise, I will return it truly to you." "But you must be quick," said Lady Katrine, "in case he should hear that I have returned, and have not written. How will you ascertain?" "There are many ways," answered the knight, "but principally by a person whom I hope to find in London, and who sees more deeply into the hidden truth than mortal eyes can usually do." "Can you mean Sir Cesar?" demanded Lady Katrine. "I do," answered the knight. "Do you know that very extraordinary being?" "I know him as every one knows him," answered Lady Katrine; "that is, without knowing him. But if he be in London, and will give you the information, all doubt will be at an end; for what he says is sure; though indeed I often used to tease the queer little old man by pretending not to believe his prophecies. till our royal mistress, whom God protect, has rated me for plaguing him. He was much a favourite of hers, and I somewhat a favourite of his; for those odd magical hop-o'-my-thumbs, I believe, love those best who cross them a little. He gave me this large sapphire ring when he went away last year, bidding me send it back to him if I were in trouble, quite fairy-tale-like. So now, Sir Osborne, you shall carry it to him, and he will counsel you rightly. Put it in your cap where he may see it. There now, it looks quite like some lady's favour. But don't go and tilt at every one who denies that Katrine Bulmer is the loveliest creature under the sun." "Nay, I must leave that to my Lord Darby," answered Sir Osborne. "Now, that was meant maliciously," cried Lady Katrine; "but I don't care. Wait a little, and if there be a weak point in all your heart, sir knight, I'll plague you for your sly look." Lady Katrine Bulmer's spirits were that of elastic quality not easily repressed, and before 10 minutes were over all her gaiety returned in full force, nor did it cease its flow till their arrival in Greenwich. For his part, Sir Osborne strove to keep pace with her liveliness, and perhaps even forced his wit a little in the race, that he might not be behindhand. Heaven knows what was passing in his mind; whether it really was an accession of gaiety at approaching the court, or whether it was that he wished to show his fair companion that the discovery he had made of her engagements to Lord Darby did not at all mortify him, notwithstanding the little coquetry that she might have exercised upon himself. They now, however, approached the place of their destination, under the favourable auspice of a fair afternoon. The most pardonable sort of superstition is perhaps that which derives its auguries from the face of nature, leading us to fancy that the bright golden sunshine, the clear blue heaven, the soft summer breeze, and the cheerful song of heaven's choristers indicate approaching happiness to ourselves, or that the cloud, the storm, and the tempest come prophetic of evil and desolation. At least both hope and fear, the two great movers in all man's feelings, lend themselves strangely to this sort of divination, combining with the beauty of the prospect, or the brightness of the sky, to exalt our expectations of the future, or lending darker terrors to the frown of nature, and teaching us to dread or to despair. When Sir Osborne and his party arrived at the brow of Shooter's Hill, the evening was as fair and lovely as if it had been summer, one of those sweet sunsets that sometimes burst in between two wintry days in the end of March or the beginning of April, a sort of herald to announce the golden season that comes on. The whole country round, as far as they could see, whether looking towards Eltham and Chislehurst, or northwards towards the river, was one wide sea of waving boughs, just tinged with the first green of the spring, while the oblique rays of the declining sun, falling upon the huge boles of the old oaks and beeches, caught upon the western side of each, and invested its giant limbs as with a golden armour. Every here and there, too, the beams, forcing their way through the various openings in the forest, cast across the road bright glimpses of that rich yellow light peculiar to wood scenery, and alternated with the long shadows of the trees, marked the far perspective of the highway descending to the wide heath below. The eye rested not on the heath, though it, too, was glowing with the full effulgence of the sky, but passing on, caught a small part of the palace of Greenwich, rising above the wild oaks which filled the park, and then still farther, turning towards the west, paused upon the vast metropolis, with its red and dizzy atmosphere, high above which rose the heavy tower and wooden spire of old Paul's Church; while to the left, beyond the influence of the smoke, was seen standing almost alone, in solemn majesty, the beautiful pile of the Westminster. Sir Osborne Maurice impulsively reined in his horse, and seemed as if he could scarcely breathe when the whole magnificent scene rushed at once upon his view. "So this is London," cried he, "the vast, the wealthy, and the great, the throne of our island monarchs, from whence they sway a wide and powerful land. On, on!" And striking his horse with his spurs, he darted down the road, as if he were afraid that the great city would, before he reached it, fade away like the splendid phantasms seen by the Sicilian shepherds, showing for a moment a host of castles and towers, and palaces, and then fleeting by and leaving naught but empty air. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Darnley by G.P.R. James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 14. Paracelsus and his chymistical followers are so many Promethei, will fetch fire from heaven. Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy. Now might I expend 5 pages of post-octavo, with great satisfaction to my readers and myself, in describing minutely the old rambling palace inhabited by Henry VIII. At Greenwich, particularising its several angles and abutments, its small lattice windows, its bays and octagons, together with the various cartouches and mascarons, which filled up the spaces and covered the corbels between. But unhappily I am in an egregious hurry, having already expended one whole tome without getting through a 5th part of the portentous bulk of Professor Vonderbrugius. I might, indeed, comfortably extend my tale to 4 volumes, instead of 3. But no, gentle reader, out of consideration for thine exemplary patience, I spare thee the infliction, and shall curtail my descriptions, compress my dialogues, circumscribe my digressions, and concentrate my explanations, so as to restrain my history within the bounds I had originally proposed for its extent. Suffice it, then, to say that Lady Katrine, having recalled to the knight's remembrance that his course lay towards Greenwich, and not to London, as he seemed inclined to direct it, they turned their horses to the right at the bottom of the hill, and soon reached the river-side, where, spreading along a little to the eastward of the spot on which the hospital at present stands, lay a large mass of heavy architecture, which, if judged by modern notions, would be regarded as not very fit for the dwelling of a king. The dull appearance of the building, however, was relieved by the gaiety of the objects round about, for though the sun was now half below the horizon, yet loitering round the various gates of the palace, or running to and fro on their separate errands, was seen a host of servants and attendants in rich and splendid suits, while multitudes of guards and henchmen, decked out to pamper the costly whims of their luxurious lord, showed forth their finery to the evening air. More than one group of lords, and ladies too, enjoying the fine sunset before the palace, made the parade a sort of living pageant, while the river beyond, as if emulous of the gay scene, fluttered and shone with the streamers and gilding of the various barges with which it was covered. To every one they met, Lady Katrine seemed known, and all, according to their rank, greeted her as she passed, some with light welcome, some with respectful salutations, all stopping the moment after to turn and fix their eyes upon Sir Osborne, with that sort of cold, inquiring glance which owns no affinity with its object but merely curiosity. "Who is he?" demanded one. "What splendid armour!" cried another. "He must be from Rochester," said a third. But no word of gratulation met his ear, no kind, familiar voice bade him welcome, and he rode on with that chill, solitary sensation of friendlessness which we never so strongly feel as in the presence of a crowd, who, possessing some communion of thought and feeling amongst themselves, have no established link of sympathy with us. At one of the smaller doors in the western wing of the palace, Lady Katrine reined in her horse, and Sir Osborne, springing to the ground, assisted her to dismount, while one of the royal servants, who came from within, held the bridle with all respect. In answer to her question, the attendant replied that her Highness Queen Catherine was at that moment dressing for the banquet which she was about to give to the king and the foreign ambassadors, and that she had commanded not to be interrupted. "That is unfortunate, Sir Osborne Maurice," said the young lady, resuming somewhat of that courtly coldness which had given way to the original wildness of her nature while she had been absent. "I am sure that her highness, who is bounty itself, would have much wished to thank you for the protection and assistance which you have given to me, her poor servant, but—" and remembering the charge which the knight had taken of her letter to Lord Darby, she hesitated for a moment, not knowing how to establish some means of communication between them. "Oh, they will break all those things!" she cried, suddenly stopping and turning to the servant. "Good Master Alderson, do look to them for a moment. That groom is so awkward. Give him the horse. Now, knight, quick, quick," she continued, lowering her voice as the servant left them. "Where do you lodge in London? I must have some way of hearing of your proceeding. Where do you lodge? Bless us, man in armour! Where are your wits?" "Oh, I have forgot," replied the knight. "It is called the Rose, in the Lawrence Poultney." "At the Duke of Buckingham's? Good, good," she replied; and then making him a low curtsy as the servant again approached, she added with a mock gravity that nearly made the knight laugh, in spite of his more sombre feelings, "And now, good knight, I take my leave of your worship, thanking you 1,000 times for your kindness and protection; and depend upon it, that when her highness the queen shall have a moment to receive you, I will take care to let you know." Thus saying, with another low curtsy, she retired into the palace; and Sir Osborne, mounting his horse, bade adieu to the precincts of the court, bearing away with him none of those feelings of hope with which he had first approached it. There seemed a sort of coldness in its atmosphere which chilled his expectations; and disappointed, too, of his introduction to the queen, he felt dissatisfied and repelled, and had the fit held, might well have taken ship once more and returned into Flanders. After having thus ridden on for some way, giving full rein to melancholy fancies, he found himself in the midst of a small town, with narrow streets, running along by the river, shutting out almost all the daylight that was left; and not knowing if he was going in the right direction, he called Longpole to his side, asking whether he had ever been in London. "Oh, yes, sir," replied the custrel, "and have stayed in it many a month. 'Tis a wonderful place for the three sorts of men, the knaves, the fools, and the wise men; and as far as I can see, the one sort gets on as high as the other. The fool gets promoted to court, the knave gets promoted at the gallows, and the wise man gets promoted to be lord mayor, and has the best of the bargain." "But tell me, Longpole," said Sir Osborne, "where are we now? For night is falling, and in sooth I know not my way." "This is the good town of Deptford," said Longpole; "but if your lordship ride on, we shall soon enter into Southwark, and there is an excellent good hostel, called the Tabard, the landlady of which may be well esteemed a princess for her fat, and a woman for her tongue. God's blessing is upon her bones, and has well covered them. If your worship lodge there, you shall be treated like a prince." "It may be better," said Sir Osborne, "for to night; but you must lead the way, good Longpole, for this is my first sight of the great city." Longpole readily undertook the pilotage of the knight and his company, and in about half an hour lodged them safely in the smart parlour of the Tabard, perhaps the very same where, more than a century before, Chaucer, the father of our craft, sat himself at his ease; for the Tabard was an old house that had maintained its good fame for more than one generation, and the landlady piqued herself much on the antiquity of her dwelling, telling how her great grandfather had kept that very house, ay, and had worn a gold chain to boot; and how both the inn and the innkeepers had held the same name, till she, being a woman, alack, had brought it as her dower to her poor dear deceased husband, who died 20 years ago come Martinmas. All this was detailed at length to Sir Osborne while his supper was in preparation, together with various other long orations, till the good dame found that the knight was not willing to furnish her with even the ahs, and ohs, and yeses, which offer a sort of baiting places for a voluble tongue; but that, on the contrary, he leaned his back against the chimney, not attending to one word she said after the first 10 sentences. Upon this discovery, she e'en betook herself to Longpole, declaring that his master was a proper man, a fine man, and a pensive. Longpole was, we all know, much better inclined to gossiping than his master, and accordingly, as he found that his jolly hostess would fain hear the whole of his lord's history, as a profound secret which she was to divulge to all her neighbours the next morning, he speedily furnished her with a most excellent allegory upon the subject, which found its way, with various additions and improvements, to suit the taste of the reciters, through at least 500 different channels before the ensuing night. In the meanwhile the knight supped well, and found himself happier, slept well, and rose with renewed hope. So he was but of flesh and blood after all. As soon as he was up, and before he was dressed, the door of his chamber flew open, and in rushed a thing called a barber, insisting upon his being shaved. Volumes have been written upon barbers, and volumes still remain to be written, but it shall not be I who will write them. Suffice it that for the sake of those who know not what I mean, I define a barber. It is a thing that talks and shaves and talks and shaves again. The true immutable that never varies, but comes down from age to age like a magpie, the same busy chattering thing that its fathers were before it. Sir Osborne acquiesced in the operation, of which, indeed, he stood in some want, and the barber pounced upon his visage in a moment. "The simple moustache," he cried. "Well, 'tis indeed the most seemly manner, though the pique devant is gaining ground a little. Not that I mean to say, fair sir, that the beard is not worn anyway, so it be well trimmed, and the moustache is of a sweet comely nature. The simple moustache. You have doubtless heard, fair sir, of a royal pageant, which cheered the heart of the queen and her ladies last night. We used indeed to cut beards always, to suit the nature of the physiognomy, supplying, as it were, remedies for the evil tricks of nature. Now my good Lord Darby gives in to the pique devant, for it is a turn that ladies love, and doubtless you have heard his marriage spoken of to a lady, oh, such a beautiful lady, though I cannot remember her name, but a most excellent lady. Your worship would not wish me to leave the pique devant. I will undertake to raise and nourish it by a certain ointment, communicated to me by an alchemist in 10 days. Make but the essay, fair sir. Try how it comports with the figure of your face." "No, no," cried Sir Osborne, much in the same manner as the young man of Bagdad. "Cease your babbling, and make haste and shave me." The operation, however, was sooner brought to a termination than in the Arabian Nights, and being free from his chattering companion, the knight took 1 or 2 turns in his apartment in deep thought. "So," said he, "this light of love, Lord Darby, does play the poor girl false; and, as she said, the arrow will rankle in her heart, and rob her of every better hope. But still it is not sure. I will not believe it. If I had the love of such a creature as that, could I betray it?" And the thought of Lady Constance de Grey darted across his mind. "I will not believe it. There must be better assurance than a babbling fool like this. Oh, Longpole," he continued, as the man entered the room, "I have waited for you. Quick, as you know London, speed to the house of an honest Flemish merchant, William Hans. Ask him if he have received the packages from Anvers from me. Give him my true name, but bid him be secret. Bring with you the leathern case containing clothes, and see if he have any letters from Wales. Greet the old man well for me, and tell him I will see him soon. Stay, I forgot to tell you where he lives. It's near the Conduit, in Gracious Street. Any one will tell you where. William Hans is his name." Longpole was soon gone, but to the mind of Sir Osborne long before he returned. When, however, he did once more make his appearance, he not only brought the news that all the packages which Sir Osborne expected had arrived, but he also brought the large leathern case containing the apparel in which the knight was wont to appear at the court of the Duchess Regent of Burgundy, and a letter which Sir Osborne soon perceived was from his father, Lord Fitzbernard. Being privileged to peep over men's shoulders, we shall make no apology for knowing somewhat of the contents of the old earl's epistle. It conveyed in many shapes the gratifying knowledge to the son that the father was proud of the child, together with many exhortations, founded in parental anxiety, still carefully to conceal his name and rank. But the most important part of the letter was a short paragraph, wherein the earl laid his injunctions upon his son not to think of coming to see him till he had made every effort at the court, and their fate was fully decided. "And then, my son," continued Lord Fitzbernard, "come hither unto me, whether the news thou bringest be of good or bad comfort; for, of a certain, thy presence shall be of the best comfort. And if still our enemies prevail, I will pass with thee over sea into another land, and make my nobility in thy honour, and find my fortune in thy high deeds." Sir Osborne's wishes would have led him into Wales, for after 5 long years of absence he felt as it were a thirst to embrace once more the author of his birth. But still he saw that the course that his father pointed out was the one that prudence and wisdom dictated, and therefore at once acquiesced. For a while he paused, meditating over all the feelings that this letter had called up, but well knowing that every moment of a man's life may be well employed, if he will but seek to employ them. He cast his reveries behind him, and dressing himself in the costume more proper to appear at the house of the Duke of Buckingham, he commanded his armour to be carefully looked to, and paying his score at the tabard, departed to fulfil his noble friend's hospitable desire, by taking up his lodging at the manor house of the Rose in St. Lawrence Poultney. Passing through Southwark, he soon arrived at London Bridge, which, as every one knows, was then but one long street across the water, with rich shops and houses on each side, and little intervals between, through which the passenger's eye might catch the flowing of the Thames, and thence only could he learn that he was passing over a large and navigable river. The shops, it was true, were unglazed and open, and perhaps to a modern eye might look like booths, but in that day the whole of Europe could hardly furnish more wealth than was then displayed on London Bridge. The long and circumstantial history given by Stowe will save the trouble of transcribing the 11 pages which Vonderbrugius bestows upon this subject. For though I cannot be sure that every one has read the old chronicler's Survey of London, yet certainly every one may read it if they like. Passing, then, over London Bridge, the knight and his followers took their way up Gracious Street, now corruptly Gracechurch Street, and riding through the heart of the city, soon arrived at the gates of the Duke of Buckingham's magnificent mansion of the Rose. As they approached the garden entrance, they observed a man covered with dust, as from a long journey, dismount from his horse at the door, bearing embroidered on his sleeve the cognizance of a swan, from which, with the rest of his appearance, Sir Osborne concluded that he was a courier from the Duke. This supposition proved to be correct, the considerate and liberal-minded nobleman having sent him forward to prepare the household to receive his young protégé, and also for the purpose of conveying various other orders and letters which might tend to the advancement of his views. But it so unfortunately had happened, the man informed the knight, that he had been attacked on the road by 4 armed men, who had taken from him his bag with the letters, and that therefore the only thing which remained for him to do was to deliver the verbal orders which he had received to his grace's steward, and then to return to his lord and inform him of the circumstances as they had occurred. The profound respect with which he was treated very soon evinced to Sir Osborne what those verbal orders were. He found the retinue of a prince ready to obey his commands, and a dwelling that in decoration, if not in size, certainly surpassed that of the king. It was not, however, the object of the young knight to draw upon himself those inquiries which would certainly follow any unnecessary ostentation, nor would he have been willing, even had it coincided with his views, to have made his appearance at the court with so much borrowed splendour. He signified, therefore, to the chamberlain his intention of requiring merely the attendance of the 3 yeomen who, with his own custrel, had accompanied him from Kent, and added that, though he might occupy the apartments which had been allotted to him when he was in London, and dine at the separate table which, by the duke's command, was to be prepared for himself, he should most probably spend the greater part of his time at Greenwich. Having made these arrangements, he determined to lose no time in proceeding to seek for Dr. Butts, the king's physician, at whose house he had good hopes of hearing of his old tutor, Dr. Wilbraham, and of discovering what credit was to be given to the reported marriage of the young Earl of Derby. Sir Osborne knew that the physician was one of those men who had made and maintained a high reputation at the court by an honest frankness, which, without deviating into rudeness, spared not to speak the truth to king or peasant. He was a great well-wisher to human nature, and feeling that if all men would be as sincere as himself, the crop of human misery would be much less to reap, he often lost patience with the worldlings, and flouted them with their insincerity. His character contained many of those strange oppositions to which humanity is subject. He was ever tender-hearted, yet often rough, and combined in manner much bluntness with some courtesy. He was learned, strong-minded, and keen-sighted, yet often simple as a child, and much led away by the mad visions of the alchemists of the time. However, as we have said, he was greatly loved and respected at the court, and from his character and office was more intimately acquainted with all the little private secrets and lies of the day, than any other person perhaps, except Sir Cesar, the astrologer, with whom he was well acquainted, and upon whom he himself looked with no small reverence and respect, shrewdly suspecting that in his magical studies he had discovered the grand secret. Towards his house, then, Sir Osborne directed his steps, taking with him no one but a footboy of the duke's to show him the way; for as the good physician lived so far off as Westminster, it became necessary to have some guide to point out the shortest and most agreeable roads, instead of taking the highway, which, following the course of the river, ran in nearly a straight line from London to Westminster. The boy led Sir Osborne through the beautiful fields which extended over the ground in the neighbourhood of Lincoln's Inn, and which, instead of being filled with smoky houses and dirty multitudes, were then breathing nothing but sweets from the primroses and other wild spring flowers that were rising fresh out of the rich and grateful soil. Thence, cutting across through many a gate, and over many a stile, his young conductor brought him out into the road just at the little milk and curd house in the midst of the village of Charing, from whence, looking down the road to the left, they could see the palace, the gardens of the bishops of Durham and York, with the magnificent abbey rising over some clumps of trees beyond. Passing by York Place, where bustling menials and crowding courtiers announced the ostentatious power of the proud prelate who there reigned, they left the royal mansions also behind them, and entering into some of the narrower and more intricate streets in Westminster, soon reached a house with a small court before it, which, as the boy informed Sir Osborne, was the dwelling of the physician. Seeing a door open opposite, the knight entered and found himself in a sort of scullery, where a stout servant girl was busily engaged in scrubbing some pots and crucibles with such assiduity that she could scarcely leave off even to answer his inquiry of whether her master was at home. "Yes, sir, yes, he is at home," replied she at length; "but he cannot be spoken with, unless you are very bad, for he is busy in the laboratory." The knight signified that he had a great desire to speak with him, and the girl, looking at him somewhat more attentively, said that, if he were from abroad, the doctor would see him, she was sure, for he had a great many foreign folks with him always. The knight replied that, though he was not a foreigner, he certainly had come from abroad very lately, upon which assurance the damsel relinquished her crucible scrubbing, and went to announce his presence. Returning in a few minutes, she ushered him through a long dark passage into a large low-roofed room, at the farther end of which appeared a furnace, with the chimney carried through the ceiling, and near it various tables covered with all sorts of strange vessels and utensils. Round about, still nearer the door, were strewed old mouldering books and manuscripts, huge masses of several kinds of ore, heaps of coal and charcoal, and piles of many other matters, the nature of which Sir Osborne could not discover by the scanty light that found its way through two small lattice windows near the roof. The principal curiosity in the room yet remained. Standing before the furnace, holding in one hand a candle sweltering in the heat of the fire, and in the other a pair of chemical tongs embracing a crucible, was seen a stout portly man, of a rosy complexion, with a fur cap on his head, and his body invested in a long coarse black gown, the sleeves of which, tucked up above his elbows, exhibited a full puffed shirt of very fine linen, much too white and clean for the occupation in which he was busied. "Sir, my wench tells me you are from abroad," said he, advancing a little, and speaking quick. "From Flanders, I see, by your dress. Pray, sir, do you come from the learned Erasmus, or from Meyerden? However, I am glad to see you. You are an adept, I am sure. I see it in your countenance. Behold this crucible," and he poked it so near Sir Osborne's nose as to make him start back and sneeze violently with the fumes. "Sir, that is a new effect," continued the doctor. "I am sure that I have found it. It makes people sneeze. That is the 130th effect I have discovered in it. Every hour, every moment, as it concentrates, I discover new effects, so that doubtless by the time it is perfectly concreted, it will have all powers, even to the great effect, and change all things into gold. But let us put that down." And taking a paper, he wrote, "113th effect, makes people sneeze. Violently, I think you said?" "Violently. And now, my dear sir, what news from the great Erasmus?" "None that I know, my good sir," answered Sir Osborne, "as I never had the advantage of his acquaintance." An explanation now ensued, which at last enlightened the ideas of the worthy physician, though he had so fully possessed himself with the fancy that the knight was an adept from Flanders, a country at that time famous for alchemical researches, that it was some time before he could entirely disembarrass his brain from the notion. "Bless my soul!" cried he, "so you are the young gentleman that my excellent good uncle Wilbraham was concerned about; and well he might be, truly, seeing what a lover you are of the profound and noble science. He came here yesterday to inquire for you, and finding that I had heard nothing of you, I thought he would have gone distracted. But tell me, fair sir, have you met with any of the famous green water of Palliardo? Ha! I see you were not to be deceived. I procured some, and truly, on dipping the blade of a knife therein, it appeared gilt. But what was it? A mere solution of copper." "You mistake, I see, still," replied the knight. "In truth, I know nothing of the science to which you allude. I doubt not that it is one of the most excellent and admirable inquiries in the world. But I am a soldier, my dear sir, and have as yet made but little progress in turning anything into gold." "Slife! I know not how I came to think so," cried the doctor. "Sure the servant told me so. Ho, Kitty!" And throwing open the door, he called loudly to the woman, "Ho, Kitty! How came you to tell me the gentleman was an adept? Zounds, I have made him sneeze. But who is it that I see in the lavery? Ah, Uncle Wilbraham, come in, come in." No words can express the joy of the good tutor when he beheld the knight. He embraced him 1,000 times, he shook him by the hand, he shed tears of joy, and he made him repeat 1,000 times every particular of his escape. "The villain! The wretch!" cried he, whenever the name of Sir Payan was mentioned. "The dissembling hypocrite! We have had news since we left Canterbury that the posse, which I obtained with great difficulty from the magistrates, when they arrived at the manor house, found every one in bed, but were speedily let in, when Sir Payan sent word down, that though he was much surprised to be so visited, being a magistrate himself, yet the officers might search where they pleased, for that he had no prisoners during the day but 2 deer-stalkers, whom he had liberated that evening on their penitence. They searched and found no one, and so sent me a bitter letter this morning for putting them on the business." "I'm glad to hear they found no one," said the knight, "for then my poor companion, Jekin Groby, has escaped. But let me ask, how is Lady Constance?" "Alas, not well, my lord, not well," answered the clergyman. "First, the anxiety about you. In truth, she has never looked well since, not knowing whether you were dead or alive, and having known you in her youth. Then this sudden news that my lord cardinal will have her marry her noble cousin, Lord Darby, has agitated her." The knight turned as pale as death, for feelings that had lain unknown in the deepest recesses of his heart swelled suddenly up, and nearly overpowered him. His love for Lady Constance de Grey had run on like a brook in the summer time, which flows sweet, tranquil, and scarcely perceptible, till the first rains that gather in the mountains swell it to a torrent that sweeps away all before it. Of his own feeling he had hitherto known nothing. He had known, he had but felt, that it was sweet to see her, that it was sweet to think of her. But now at once, with the certainty that she was lost to him for ever, came the certainty that he loved her deeply, ardently, irrevocably. "Umph!" said Dr. Butts, at once comprehending all that the changes of the knight's complexion implied. "Umph! It's a bad business." "Nay, my good nephew, I see not that," answered the clergyman, who, a great deal less clear-sighted than the physician, had neither seen Sir Osborne's paleness, nor for a moment suspected his feelings. "I see not that. 'Tis the very best marriage in the realm for both parties, and the lady is only a little agitated from the anxiety and hurry of the business." "If that be all," said the doctor, "I'll soon cure her. But tell me, why did you call him my lord just now?" Dr. Wilbraham looked at the knight with a glance that seemed to supplicate pardon for his inadvertence; but Sir Osborne soon relieved him. "I am going, Dr. Butts," said he, "to ask your advice and assistance, and therefore my secret must be told you. I will ask your advice because you know the court thoroughly, and because having, I am afraid, lost one good means of introducing myself to his grace the king, I would fain discover some other. And I tell you my secret, because I am sure that it is safe with you as with myself." "It is," said the physician; "but if you would have me serve you well, and to some purpose, you must tell me all. Give me no half confidence. Let me know everything, and then if I can do you good, I will. If not, your counsel shall not be betrayed, my lord, I suppose I must say." "You had better tell him all your history, my dear Osborne," said Dr. Wilbraham. "He can, and I'm sure he will, for my sake, serve you well." "My dear Osborne!" echoed the physician. "Then I have it. You are my Lord Darnley, my good uncle's first pupil. Your history, my lord, you need not tell me. That I know. But tell me your plans, and I will serve you heart and hand, to the best of my power." The plans of the young knight need not be again detailed here. Suffice it is, that he laid them all open to the worthy physician, who, however, shook his head. "It's a mad scheme," said he, in his abrupt manner. "His grace, though right royal, bountiful, and just, is often as capricious as a young madam in her honeymoon. However, if Buckingham, Abergany, Surrey, and such wise and noble men judge well of it, I cannot say against it. A straw, 'tis true, will balance it one way or t'other. However, give me to-day to think, and I will find some way of bringing you to the king, so as to gain his good will at first. And now I will go to see Lady Constance de Grey." "We will go along, good doctor," exclaimed the tutor, "for I must be back to speak with her, and Osborne must render her a visit to thank her for her good wishes and endeavours in his behalf. She will be so charmed to see him free and unhurt, that 'twill make her well again." "Will it?" said the doctor, drily. "Well, you shall give her that medicine after I have ordered her mine. But let me have my turn first. I ask but a quarter of an hour, then come both of you; and in the meantime, my good learned uncle, study that beautiful amphora, and tell me, if you can, why the ancient Greeks placed always on their tombs an empty urn. Was it an emblem of the body, from within which the spirit was departed, like the wine from the void amphora, leaving but the vessel of clay to return to its native earth? Think of it till we meet." Thus saying, the learned physician left them, to proceed on his visit to Lady Constance de Grey. Chapter 15 of Darnley, by G.P.R. James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15. Though heaven's inauspicious eye lay black on love's nativity, her eye a strong appeal shall give. Beauty smiles, and love shall live. Crawshaw. When Dr. Butts had left them, the knight would fain have excused himself from accompanying his old tutor on the proposed visit. He had encountered many a danger in the imminent deadly breach, and the battle-field, with as light a heart as that which beats in beauty's bosom, when she thinks of sunning herself in admiring looks at the next ball. But now his courage failed him at the thought of meeting the person he loved best, and so much did his spirit quail, that you might have brained him with a lady's fan. Dr. Wilbraham, however, pressed, and insisted so intently upon the pleasure it would give Lady Constance to see him after his escape, and the rudeness which might be attributed to him if he did not wait upon her soon, that he at length consented to go; and shortly after the physician had left them, they themselves took their way towards the dwelling of the lady. In this happy age, when choice is as free as thought, we can hardly imagine the generous nobility of England submitting to yield the selection of a companion for life to the caprice of a king or of his favourite. Yet such was frequently the case in the times whereof we write, and dangerous would it have been to have opposed the will of the despotic Henry, or his tyrant minister, when the whim of the one, or the interest of the other, led them to seek the union of any two families. It is true that the sad example of Lady Arabella Stuart was not yet before their eyes, but still the arbitrary power of the king was well enough established to judge of what he might do, and few would have been found bold enough to assert their liberty of choice in opposition to his command. Nor at that time was Wolsey's will less potent than the king's, so that to the mind of the young knight the marriage of Lady Constance with Lord Darby seemed fixed beyond recall. There was, however, something in all that the old tutor said of her anxiety respecting his fate, joined with a certain tenderness that he had felt in her manner towards himself, and the words she had inadvertently let drop respecting the fame he had acquired in Flanders, that gave a vague but delightful feeling of hope to his bosom. And while walking on with Dr. Wilbraham, there was still amongst the wild confusion of his thoughts a strange sort of dreamy plan for winning her yet. The buoyancy of youthful expectation that would not be depressed, like a child's boat of cork, still rising above the waves that had overwhelmed many a goodlier vessel. If I dared but think she loved me, thought Sir Osborne, I should fear nothing. And he felt as if his single arm could conquer a world. But then came the remembrance that as an equivalent for her rich lands and lordships he had nothing, absolutely nothing. And with a sigh he entered the house, which Wolsey had taken care to provide for his fair ward as near his own palace as possible. Most doors in that day standing open, Dr. Wilbraham, whose sacred character gave him much freedom of access, took no pains to call servant or attendant to announce them, but leading the way up the narrow winding stairs, opened the door at the end of the flight, and brought Sir Osborne into a large room, wherein were sitting several of the young lady's women, occupied in various tasks of needlework and embroidery. One of these rose, and in silence gave them entrance to a chamber beyond, into which the clergyman conducted his former pupil, without even the ceremony of announcing him. Lady Constance at the moment was seated somewhat listlessly on a pile of oriental cushions, holding her arms extended, while Dr. Butts kept his hand upon her pulse. She was dressed in white, after the mode of the French of that day, the upper part of her robe, except the sleeves, which were large and floating, fitting close to her figure round the waist and shoulders, but falling back just above the bosom into a beautiful standing ruff, or fraise, as the French termed it, of fine Italian lace. The skirt of the robe was wide and loose, and dividing at the girdle, showed part of a satin dress beneath, as well as the beautiful small foot and delicate ankle, which, hanging over the edge of the cushions, indicated, fully as much as the heaviness of her eyes, the languor of sickness and want of rest. A few yards behind her stood her waiting woman, who remained in the room, fully as much in the capacity of a duenna as for the purpose of serving her mistress. As Lady Constance did not raise her head when the door opened, thinking that it was some of the domestics who entered, the eyes of the waiting maid were those that first encountered Sir Osborne; and as she bore him no small good will for having given up with such alacrity the tapestry chamber at the inn to herself and lady, immediately on perceiving him, she burst forth with a pleasurable "Oh dear!" Lady Constance looked up, and seeing who entered, turned as red as fire, then pale, then red again, and starting up from the cushions, drew her hands suddenly away from Dr. Butts, advanced a step, hesitated, and then stood still. "Ugh!" muttered the physician. "It's a bad business." "Oh, Sir Osborne Maurice!" said the lady, her eyes sparkling with pleasure, although she struggled hard to compose herself, to seem disembarrassed, and to hide the busy feelings at her heart. "I am most delighted to see you safe, for indeed that is, Dr. Wilbraham, began to be very seriously alarmed, and though he told me there was no danger, yet I saw that he was very much frightened, and I hope you got away easily. Will you not take that seat?" The young knight took the chair to which she pointed, and thanked her for the interest and kindness she had shown towards him, with some degree of propriety, though at first he felt his lip quiver as he spoke, and then he fancied that his manner was too cold and ceremonious; so to avoid that, he made it somewhat too warm and ardent, and in the end, finding that he was going from one extreme to the other, without ever resting at the mean, he turned to Dr. Butts, and said with a sort of anxiety, which went thrilling to the heart of Lady Constance, that he hoped he had not found his patient really ill. "Indeed I did, though," answered the physician; "a great deal worse than I had expected, and therefore I shall go directly and tell my good lord, the Reverend Father Cardinal, that the lady must be kept as tranquil as possible, and as quiet." "Nay, nay," said Lady Constance, "I am not so ill, indeed, my good physician. I feel better now. However, you may go to my lord cardinal if you will, but I really am better." said Dr. Butts. "Now I think you are worse. But tell me, lady, why do you quit the habits of your country to dress yourself like a Frenchwoman?" Lady Constance smiled. "Do you not know," said she, "that I am a French vassal? Did you not know that all the estates that belonged to my mother, of the Val de Marne and Boissy, are held from the French crown?" "Go and see them, lady," said Dr. Butts. "The French air would suit you better than the English, I've a notion, for a year or two at least." "Nay, Dr. Butts," said Sir Osborne, "why deprive England of Lady Constance's presence? There are so few like her," he added in an under voice, "that indeed we cannot spare her." Lady Constance raised her eyes for an instant to his face. They met his, and though it was but for a moment, that look was sufficient to determine his future fate. 1,000 such looks from Lady Katrine Bulmer would have meant nothing. From Lady Constance de Grey that one meant everything, and Sir Osborne's bosom beat with renewed hope. True, the same obstacles existed as heretofore, but it mattered not. Nothing, he thought, nothing could now impede his progress, and he would dare all, defy all, win her or die. Nor in truth was the heart of Lady Constance de Grey less lightened, although she still felt that trembling fear which a woman, perhaps, does not wholly lose for long after the lips of the man she loves have made profession of his attachment. Yet still she was almost sure that she was loved. There was something in Darnley's manner, in his agitation, in his anxiety about her, in his very glance, far, far more eloquent than words. And Lady Constance's certainty that he loved her was more, perhaps, a sensation of the heart than a conviction of the mind. She felt that she was loved. While these thoughts, or feelings, or what you will, were busy in the bosom of each, a servant entered, and with much more ceremony than the good chaplain had used to usher in the young knight, announced that Lord Darby waited in the anteroom to inquire after her ladyship's health. "Bid him come in," said the young lady, and in a moment after, Sir Osborne had his rival before his eyes. He was a slight, elegant young man, dressed with great splendour of apparel, and possessed of that sort of calm, easy self-possession, and gay, nonchalant bearing, that made the knight instantly conceive a violent inclination to cut his throat. "Good morrow, my fair cousin," cried he, advancing. "Good morrow, gentles all. God give you good morrow, Mrs. Margaret," to the waiting woman. "What, have you been standing there ever since I left you yesterday?" The woman tossed her head pettishly, much to the young lord's amusement. "Gad, you must do like the hens, then. Stand upon one leg while you rest the other. But say, my fair cousin, how dost thou do?" "I am not well, my lord," replied the lady. "At least, so Dr. Butts would fain have me believe, and he says I must have quiet. So, by your leave, I will not have you quarrel with my woman, Margaret, as you did yesterday." "Faith, not I," answered he. "I love her dearly, bless the mark. But, cousin, his reverend grace the cardinal commends him, by your humble slave, to your most sublime beauty, and adviseth, that is, you know, commandeth, that you should betake yourself, for change of air, which means for his pleasure and purposes, to the court at Greenwich, to which you are invited by our royal mistress and queen; and if it seemeth fit to you, which would say, whether you like it or not, he will have his barge prepared for you to morrow at noon." "Present my thanks to the very reverend father," replied Lady Constance, "and say that I will willingly be ready at the hour he names." "Nay, if you are so sweetly obedient to all his commands," said Lord Darby, more seriously, "faith, Constance, our plan of yesterday will fall to the ground, for I cannot be rude enough to take it all on myself." Then darting off into 1,000 other subjects, the young peer laughed, and spoke with light facility of various indifferent matters, while Dr. Butts looked on, keenly observing all that passed, and Sir Osborne bent his eyes sternly upon the ground, biting his lip and playing with the hilt of his sword, more irritated, perhaps, with the confident gaiety of his rival than he would have been with a more serious and enthusiastic passion, and certainly not appearing to advantage where he wished most to please. "That sword, I think, must be of Spanish mounting," said Lord Darby, at length turning calmly towards the knight. "Sir," replied Sir Osborne, raising his eyes to his face. "I asked whether that sword was not mounted in Spain, Sir Knight," said Lord Darby quietly. "Will you let me look at it?" And he held out his hand. "I am not in the habit, my lord," replied Sir Osborne, "of giving my weapon out of my own hands; but in answer to your question, it was mounted in Spain." "I never steal folks' swords," said the peer, with the same imperturbably nonchalant air; and then turning to Dr. Wilbraham, he went on, "Dear Dr. Wilbraham, do let me see that book you talked of yesterday; for as you go to Greenwich to morrow, I shall never behold any of you again, I am sure." The good chaplain, who had remained silent ever since he had been in the room, not at all understanding what was the matter between Lady Constance and the young knight, although he evidently saw that they had from the first been both agitated and embarrassed, now rose and went to search for the book which Lord Darby required, very willing to get away from a scene he did not in the least comprehend. To make way for him, however, Sir Osborne raised his cap and plume, which had hitherto lain beside him, and as he did so, the sapphire ring that had been given him by Lady Katrina Bulmer met the eye of Lord Darby, and instantly produced a change in his whole demeanour. His cheek burned, his eye flashed, and starting upon his feet, he seemed as if he would have crossed over towards Sir Osborne; but then recovering himself, he relapsed into his former somewhat drawling manner, took leave of Lady Constance, and, without waiting for Dr. Wilbraham's return, left the apartment. A moment after, the physician also rose, in his usual quick, precipitate manner, saying that he must depart. "But, doctor," cried Mrs. Margaret, the waiting woman, seeing him proceeding towards the door, "you have not told me how I'm to manage my mistress." I can't stop," said the physician, still walking on out of the room. "What is it? What is it?" "Nay, but, doctor, you must tell me," cried she, running after him. "Indeed, I shall not know what to do with my lady." Still the doctor walked on, giving her, however, some necessary directions as he went; and Mrs. Margaret, following for a moment, left the two lovers alone. Darnley felt that it was one of those precious instants which, once lost, rarely if ever return; but an irresistible feeling of anxiety tied his tongue, and he could but gaze at Lady Constance with a look that seemed to plead for pardon, even for what he felt. The fair girl trembled in every limb, and as if she knew all that was passing in his mind, dared not look up but for a single glance, as she heard the last words hang on the physician's lips, and he began to descend the stairs. Darnley raised the glove that lay beside her. May I have it?" said he. "Oh, Darnley!" she replied; and, happy almost to delirium, he placed the glove in his bosom, and pressed an ardent kiss upon her hand. "Go!" cried she; "for heaven's sake, go, if you love me. We shall meet again soon." The knight obeyed, almost as agitated as herself, and passing out of the room just as Mrs. Margaret entered, he followed Dr. Butts, whose steps he heard descending the stairs before him. CHAPTER XVI.